enjoying the company of Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer, and Greg Swenson, chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Both of them are joining me for the next hour. Really appreciate that. Lots more to talk about, including, of course, the US presidential election. Votes are actually still being counted in 2 of those key 7 swing states. Both, though, expected to go for Donald Trump, as we've seen again and again. Those 7 swing states, both the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt, they basically swing in one way for all of them, for one candidate or the other. We also know that, of course, that Donald Trump has got the Senate. We're still seeing votes counted there, get the House of Representatives as well. Of course, a majority on the Supreme Court. So what is he going to do if he actually does have that extraordinary amount of control and power over the US government and institutions? Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have both congratulated Donald Trump. Really must have hurt, as indeed has, of course, back here, Keir Starmer and David Lammy. But we've also had that concession speech last night, which is quite painful, but at least it's the last we have to hear from Kamala Harris outside the place, supposed to be where her victory speech was going to be delivered. Apparently, it took so long for her to write one because they hadn't actually thought the possibility that she'd actually be defeated, which appears to be exactly the same situation for pretty much every broadcaster in America as well. We're also going to be talking about Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch. She appeared at PMQs yesterday and demanded that Keir Starmer and his Foreign Secretary David Lammy apologise to Donald Trump over his Foreign Secretary now calling Donald Trump a neo-Nazi and KKK sympathiser. And, of course, we're going to talk about the boats crisis. It continues apace. Keir Starmer has admitted that he can't end the small boats crisis alone. He's urged EU leaders to give more cooperation to tackle illegal migration. But given that they can't solve it on their own shores, what hope is for them to actually help us? We'll talk about all of that coming up. And I want to hear from you. I want to know from you about the US presidential election. What should British politicians learn from Donald Trump's victory in the US election? Give us a call on 0344 499 1000. You can text on 87222. You can get in touch on X at Talk TV. Hi, Elon Musk. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs 1 standard network rate message. You can leave a message on X for free, of course, and indeed on our YouTube page. And if you've not had a look at our YouTube page, huge numbers are watching us on the show yesterday. They're very grateful for that. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, you're missing out on these 2 dashing gentlemen in the studio today if you're only listening to them rather than seeing them. Oh, bless you both. Having a bit of a love-in, these 2, I have to say. Now, let's go back to where we were yesterday. We woke up, looked like it was going to be a Trump victory very early on in the morning. Certainly before my show it was confirmed, it was definitely going to be a Trump victory. We saw him basically having a victory speech. We then got Kamala Harris's very late last night, 9 o'clock last night UK time. She finally decided to concede. She'd made a phone call, as had Joe Biden, to Donald Trump. In terms of what happens next, we know, Greg Swenson, that Donald Trump is putting together his team. He's had an awful lot of people, so good people. He only ever has the best people, doesn't he, on his team? He went through a hell of a lot of the best people in his last 4-year term, did he not? An awful lot of them then written books saying how awful he was, including his former chief of staff calling him a fascist. And a Nazi sympathiser. That's where those words came from in the last weeks. Who do you think he'd be looking at to appoint? Is there anyone left to appoint? And what is he going to do when he becomes president?
Yeah, look, I think a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, we were worried that there weren't going to be enough people that would work for him, that, the top tier. That theory has been completely debunked, right? There are plenty of people who want to serve in the administration. Yes, there are people with some baggage that usually it meant they were fired or they had some personal issues with Trump. Trump's not a career Washington guy. He'd only been there to the city of Washington 8 times in his life. It's probably on a school field trip. And nor had I. I mean, when you work in finance, you work on Wall Street, you don't go to that federal bureaucracy unless you have to, unless you've been indicted. And so it was a moment for Trump to kind of shake up the room, throw a grenade into the room, and he did. And
just draining the swamp, that was the big cry.
Thank goodness he fired people. Biden, after the Afghanistan debacle, I just couldn't believe that no one was fired. As it turns out, it's because the advisors advised him to do smart things and he ignored them. So maybe there's reason for that. But he should have fired someone in Treasury or his economic advisors who advised him to overstimulate already stimulated economy to cause inflation, to depress the energy industry, to penalize Americans at the gas tank. So, you know, there's a lot of things that people did wrong in the Biden administration, and they're still there. And there's a lot of things that, you know, maybe mistakes were made in the Trump
administration. But in terms of like what he's actually going to do, you know,
okay.
again, it's tackling migration.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about what he's going to do on the economy. He's talk about, you know, getting the trans ideology out of the schools and stuff. A lot of like taking out, you know, waste and inefficiency and the massive bureaucracy of the blob in American bureaucracy. Now, again, Elon Musk gets put in charge of that. That is going to seriously happen.
He will get
that is going to be fun to watch.
Top tier. Elon Musk to start to clean up the bureaucracy. Scott Bessent, who's an incredible hedge fund manager, who's going like short list for Secretary of Treasury. I think you got a long list.
These are people who get it.
Yes,
okay.
They totally get it.
In terms of the economy, what can you do? Because there's a lot of talk about tariffs. Now, as a general rule, you know, people on the right are supposed to be in favour of free trade, not tariffs. And tariffs don't hurt so much the people you're putting tariffs on, the China or whatever. Right. They hurt your own consumers who have to pay more for those imported goods.
And it's also disruptive to supply chains. Look, I think Scott Bessent will advise the president to use the tariffs for tactical reasons. Tax or tariff unfair trade. You know, the Chinese trade was not free and fair. So use it specifically. He threatened Mexico. He did that because he wanted remain in Mexico policy, which they took. And guess what happened? Less illegal migration. So he uses those tactically. I think Scott will say that a lot. And then you have, you know, the defense. You know, you talk about people who won't work for him. They call him a fascist. Mike Pompeo was one of the most successful secretaries of state and a great advisor to the president. He is all in and has been for a while.
Very interesting. Philip Ingram, you're a former senior military intelligence officer. I know you've got, in terms of what happens in terms of foreign policy. We discussed that briefly as well first. What do you think is, you know, his top list of priorities on foreign affairs? Because every president in America gets elected on an isolationist ticket, every single one. Yeah. But they never last as isolationists because when you are the world's policeman, you have to do the job.
Yeah, I think there's three things that are going to come out. One, America first. We're going to see much more focus on, you know, what improving US industry and its position.
And why shouldn't an American president do that?
As he said, it's
we should have a prime minister who did that for us. Hey, there's the thought.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, his second one is going to be dealing with illegal migration, not migration coming in, because, you know, America has been built on migration. You know, the American people are all migrants that have come in at some stage, apart from the Native Americans. So he'll deal with that. But then on the world stage, he's already starting to set the conditions with the statement that he's put out about Hamas and told them to release the hostages before he's in. We'll start to see some more of those bold statements coming out, setting the conditions to, you know, unseat people
and this is where you talked about his unpredictability. It's a worry for people, but actually it also worries the Xi Jinpings of China and the Vladimir Putins and the mullahs in Iran.
And will bring a degree of stability because of that, because they'll back off a little bit from what they were potentially planning to do, because they won't want the wrath of him with the military might that they know that he can bring to bear.
Should he choose?
He didn't in his last presidency. He didn't have to. I think global geopolitical positions were slightly different, and that's why he didn't have to get involved in any wars. But you know, people will be watching very closely.
Do you think that Hamas waited for him to be out of power? Do you think that before they massacred people in Israel, do you think that Vladimir Putin waited till 2022 to go into Ukraine until he was out of power? I mean, you know, they waited a couple of years, it would appear. Do you think that's true? That's when people say that there were no wars during Donald Trump's time, so he was a president for peace.
No, I think there were so many other factors that came to play in it. You can't turn around and say that he was a president for peace. He built on that during his election campaign, but I think that was just
he didn't start
circumstances.
Any wars.
No, he didn't start any. You could argue that he finished some, but he caused greater problems. You know, it was his decision to withdraw from Afghanistan, which turned into the debacle. Now, his decision from someone who's trying to spend US taxpayers' dollars was based on flawed information, and it's those that give him the flawed information, the generals, the senior civil servants that were coming in saying everything's great, it's all working, we paid for it, instead of saying it's only going to work if we stay there, Mr. President. And they never said that.
That's what he advocated.
It is still an absolutely extraordinary thing. I mean, again, the abject failures in Britain as well, not by our military, though, who did a magnificent job, but our Foreign Office. There are still people who worked as translators in Afghanistan for our military who were trapped out there and unable to get out to safety, which is just absolutely, frankly, is immoral. It really is, when they've been put at risk in that way. In terms of of what's actually going to be happening in the next few months. Now, of course, we've got this incredibly long transition period, which was basically started, many, many, many years ago, when it took a couple of months to travel across the American nation. Now you can get in your private jet with Trump on the side. You don't need to. But we do have that long transition period. So we've got, again, Joe Biden still in the Oval Office, unfit to run for another term. By the way, the person I think who was most been chuckling over the last 24 hours. If there's one person who's really, really happy about that result, it's him. He was dragged kicking and screaming away from that Democratic ticket this time round, and he said he was the only person who could beat Donald Trump. He couldn't. He wouldn't have beaten him. But his view is, well, Kamala Harris won't either, and yet she couldn't. But he's still in power until January the 20th.
Yeah, which should be worrisome for Americans and for the world. But I'm not sure. It's difficult to argue. I'm not sure which way to go on Biden. Yes, he probably got a chuckle out of this. Kamala Harris underperformed Biden's numbers in every county in America.
Yes, we had this stat yesterday. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
In Georgetown or in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, there wasn't support for Kamala enough to have her beat at least Biden. She wasn't going to beat Trump, but could she beat Biden in one county in America? It's crazy. So is he really laughing right now, or does this mean his legacy has been tainted?
No, I genuinely, I think the ego is such a big thing for these top politicians. He tried to be president about 6-7 times or something before he became VP to Obama, and then he tried again. He was supposed to be the guy who was supposed to, be the
unified,
Mr. Moderate, and within hours of the Oval Office, he betrayed that with executive orders on mad trans stuff. So he's got himself to blame as far as I'm concerned.
Maybe the worst president.
He's been absolutely appalling.
Compare him to Jimmy Carter is an insult to Jimmy Carter.
Which is saying something, isn't it? Let's have a watch and listen, just for amusement value. But if you want to turn your radio off for a couple of seconds, I completely understand. But don't they? They're really short. They really are very short, these clips. But Kamala Harris. We don't care how you pronounce your name anymore, love. We didn't know for 4 years, and no one cared. She was VP. She was the vice president, the second most powerful, technically, person in the entire world. We didn't know how to pronounce her name for 4 years, and it mattered so little because she was so irrelevant. And then she became the candidate, and so it's Kamala. It's Kamala. So Kamala Harris, with her big mates Taylor Swift, Oprah Winfrey, et al., is now, of course, a defeated candidate. She came out yesterday. She gave the speech that she thought would be her victory speech. It wasn't. It was a concession speech. And here is what she had to say. Brace yourselves.
I know many people feel like we are entering a dark time. But for the benefit of us all, I hope that is not the case. But here's the thing, America, if it is, let us fill the sky with the light of a brilliant, brilliant billion of stars. The light of optimism, of faith, of truth, and service.
Don't worry, it's over now. You can come out. Genuinely, I think they tapped into ChatGPT. Please write me the most banal, utterly pointless garbage of a concession speech from a totally failed politician. And that's what they got.
I think that clip just kind of validates the argument that she was the winner of the DEI sweepstakes. I mean, you talk about good. I mean, it's one thing if you get into Harvard because you're fit in a minority group, and that's great. You got lucky. You got
And people really need to understand in America,
the vice president of
genuinely,
America.
They have had policies written into law effectively where basically if you're a bright Asian American, you can get straight A's. You don't get into college because they have to have enough places for Black Americans.
That's right. And it's racist. It's racist.
Call it what it is.
The best way to end racism is stop judging people on race, right? And so she won the DEI sweepstakes, and this is what you get. And this is why it's so wrong to judge people and promote people, fail up because you fit into an identity group. And so that clip just kind of validates. But
the extraordinary thing, we talked a little bit earlier about sort of the mad left-wing meltdown by not just Democrats but also by the left over here. And indeed, I was the left, people like Rory Stewart, who was once bizarrely a Conservative MP and minister. But Philip Ingram, people were saying, there were some supporters of Kamala Harris in that crowd when the ones that dissipated from the watch party overnight when they said, look, she's not coming out to appear. It looks like we've lost, but it took hours for them to actually concede. We're saying, well, no, she should definitely run again. The reason why she didn't win was because Biden didn't hand over soon enough. People didn't have time to get to know her, for her to set out her policies. I mean, she didn't have any policies for a few weeks. Literally had no policies for a few weeks. And if we'd seen more of her, then people would have voted for her. What do you make of that assessment?
No, I think the more we saw of her, the more voters went for Trump. Whenever she went through the Democratic nomination process formally, I think she was the first candidate to be rejected, or one of the first candidates.
She didn't even make it to vote.
She was the first to drop, and was polling number 7 in South Carolina, which is a state very favourable to.
So that says what her own party thinks of her, and therefore, with Joe Biden hanging on and hanging on and hanging on to the last possible minute and being almost bullied out by Nancy Pelosi to then hand over. He handed over late, so even if she was competent, she was on a hiding to nothing to try and build up her. But she wasn't.
Both of you, just very briefly, if I go to you, Greg, first. Is there a Democratic candidate who could have beaten Trump?
Yes, I think Josh Shapiro. Amongst others, but
is that Wisconsin?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah. The one who was declined the nominee for vice president because he's Jewish.
Because he's Jewish, it would upset the pro-Palestinians.
That's
that was the reason why, isn't it? Do you think there was a candidate that
I think there needs to be a reset in US politics where you start to get younger individuals coming through, because if Trump and Harris are the best that such a large country can put up, then yes, Trump isn't. Are the best that such a large country can put up to be the top, then there's something wrong.
And you'll see that 2028, new generation.
Absolutely,
no doubt.
It's going to be very, very interesting. Do you think it'll be J.D. Vance running?
He'll be on the short list. It'll be Ron DeSantis, J.D. Vance, and Glenn Youngkin, who might be a little older than those guys, but not
very
much.
Interesting. Always, it never stops. The cycle, but the cycle has already begun, has it not?